Welcome back to the Eric Krown Crypto channel. Wishing you a happy and healthy start to this nice, very snowy Tuesday morning over here from Helsinki, Finland. Plenty to talk about today as we follow up in the short-term time frame analysis. Bitcoin yet again hitting our short-term time frame target to the upside, then backing off that and playing out the overall technical range. So we're not saying that to necessarily toot our own horn, but more importantly to follow up on this thread of analysis that we've been having going on for quite a long time now, and what that sort of means for the next week or two to come. And then if time does allow, we will perhaps go over the long-term worst-case scenario as I see it right now, and more importantly, I do still believe that the short-term hopium scenario is still very much alive upon validation, which we will go over soon enough here. Anyways, with that in mind, we are going to swing back into the Krown trading application a little bit later in this analysis, as it's going to fit into the short-term time frame range trade. But ultimately, I should let you know that the premium features are now live. You can learn more about them in the Learn More tab over here. Basically gives you more information on the underlying market dynamics in a more relevant data feed, meaning that it's going to be faster. You get hourly data feeds, and then of course gives you access to the Jewel Light as well. All right, cool. So let's jump into it right here. Let's pick up where we left off yesterday. Yesterday we were saying a short-term bounce, very likely to our short-term time frame range highs, is going to be in order. That was the 39,500-ish tick as we identified yesterday, the bottom end of this blue box territory right here. And then if we do not see any sort of an hourly closure, specifically above 39,600, then very likely we would be looking for another retest of the range bottoms. And that's essentially what we got in the overnight hours. And right now, it's actually the same thing as what we looked at before. But because Bitcoin now has a nice structure down here, we can start to look at momentum oscillators, which are starting to give a bit of a continuation of the short-term hopium picture. So what I mean by that is short-term, we do see multiple drives of bullish divergence on the 4-hour time frame, and we do see that BBWP is within a bit of a corrective posturing right here, as we do see it once again trending down. So what I'm looking for over the next 48 hours, maybe even a little bit less than that, perhaps about 36 hours between today and basically end of Wednesday, is we're very likely going to see BBWP contract again. And then once it comes back down around here, especially around 15 or below 15 percentile, and it swings back up again, that's at the point where I want to be referencing my momentum oscillators and seeing, which side they are essentially on. So for right now, I do see that the 4-hour Jewel does have some upside curvature. So that is also, a little bit more on the good side, but it's not supported by DMI. And again, within the context of declining volatility or contractive volatility, I don't look at this as like a full signal just yet. This is a setup basically for probably the next day and a half to come. I don't think this is relevant like for this exact moment right here, right now. But to top that off, and then we'll go over the range resolutions, we do see on our other lower term time frame stochastic momentum that it, pretty much everything's actually heading up, as we identified yesterday was likely. So 4-hour stochastic momentum is actually vertical here as long as Bitcoin's above 37,900. And you will notice that the HVP on this, a little bit different than BBWP, slightly different or it is a different calculation altogether, but ultimately representing volatility, it would be looking for a bit of an expansion phase off this region. So this would be more on the short-term Boolah-ish side. And if we do go over to the 6-hour time frame as well, same thing here, although this is contraction, obviously. So that's why I do say that short-term, we're probably still looking at range plays, and this is more than likely leading up towards a resolution. Maybe not today, or perhaps end of day today, but very likely tomorrow, Wednesday. Probably coincides with the old executive order that a lot of people are fawning over right now in the US, which might be a bit of a sell the rumor, buy the news type of thing, as people are kind of pricing in the worst of the responses right now, it does look like. Anyways, 6-hour stochastic momentum does remain to the upside as long as Bitcoin's above 37,350, which is currently more than $1,000 above. And if we go over to the 3-hour, which I do quite like for this, we do see that the 3-hour is going to be with upside posturing as long as Bitcoin's above 38,400, so a little bit closer to current price action, currently trading 38,600, and hourly is going to be also vertical above 38,200, which is all good. The picture gets a little bit more interesting when we do go reference the medium and higher term timeframes, that being the 12-hour right here, which you will notice 12-hour stochastic momentum will turn up specifically above 39,400. This is where the analysis starts to get a little bit more tied in together. So while the lower term timeframes do suggest, Bitcoin probably oscillates a little bit in here and very likely does test around there, if Bitcoin does clear above the same range resolution to the upside that we had from yesterday, basically about 39.5 on a 12, on especially a 12-hour, but maybe even a 4-hour or an hourly above about 39.8, or I guess it's more like 39.9 in this case, would constitute an upside resolution, and we would naturally see 12-hour stochastic momentum turn to the upside from a very low level, I should state as well. and we very likely do see medium-term continuation up to 41 to 41 more like $41,500 to $42,000 right here, which would be which would be a much more interesting proposition for price action, simply because if Bitcoin does start to get above that region, that would be back above the 618 Fibonacci retracement for the general range that Bitcoin's been put in over the past month. The reason why that is relevant is because above that region is where this as a long-term downside continuation formation is going to be drastically reduced in its probabilities, as anywhere above basically the 618, I do look at that as, probably a bit of a trap situation for the higher term timeframes, meaning that in this case, that would be a bear trap with targets back up to the $45,000 region. The reason why that is relevant, now kind of tying all of them into now the short term, medium term, and now higher term timeframes, the daily, is that, hey, if Bitcoin gets back above there, that is or at least that is the way that I look at a major bottom being formed. And in this case, that would imply big targets up to the mid to low $50,000 territory. I think I have that marked off on, no, not this chart. Was it this chart? It's this chart right here, right? So again, you can kind of see the order of operations and the avalanche of effects if those criteria are obviously validated. So in this case, what would be an invalidation, or sorry, it's not necessarily an invalidation because none of this has been validated to the upside. We just are looking at these probabilistic setups and what would actually validate them. But what would essentially validate a downside continuation? It's the same thing. It's the same criteria as before, actually. Any sort of a medium or high term timeframe closure below about 36,500. The lower timeframe, I'd probably pick a little bit lower than that. Let's say about 36.3 on the 4 hour, or if we're using a daily, I would probably say right around about 36.5. If one of those two conditions is met, I do look at this as a redistribution formation and very likely going to lead towards a major retest back down to the low $30,000 territory. There will be stops along the way, very, very likely, probably bounces at around 34.5. But ultimately, I would be looking for Bitcoin to retest the macro range lows, that being somewhere between about 29.5 to 30,500 or so. And of course, that would have major implications into what I consider the worst case scenario for right now, which will go into this chart over here. I won't go through the full rigmarole on this, but basically, anytime that we've seen monthly MACD cross to the downside, happened 3 times in the past, plus PMAR below the moving average, plus price action also closing below the monthly white 20 simple moving average right here. And by the way, the green vertical bars correlate with the first two conditions already being met, that being the MACD and the PMAR. And then of course, the red circles correlate with the white 20 simple being closed below, have all initiate moves down on the monthly time frame over the next half year or so, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, to the green 55 exponential moving average on this chart, which currently speaking is a little bit below $24,000. Obviously, the longer that this takes, if it is going to be fulfilled at all and validated, that number will be marched up in the coming months. So next month in April, we very likely see it, go up somewhere around about $25,000 is what I would be looking for as a worst case scenario on a closing basis. So that does mean that we can get wicks lower, definitely possible. But I want to call out something here as well that I thought was rather interesting, and I have to give credit to Mr. Nimbo, a good friend who first brought this up to me, and after that, I started to look at it, and well, I think that it would certainly be on the more hopium side, so I'll just kind of lay it out as it is. All right, let me see how to kind of posture this first. Let me, do I want to do a maybe new chart? No, we can do it right here, actually. Okay. Sorry, coffee burps are coming up and I can feel them, so apologies on that. Anyways, okay, so what are we talking about here? We're talking about the monthly Bollinger Band chart. And you can see that anytime that we've seen the Bollinger Bands first expand and then rapidly collapse, those have actually been at the end of the bear market, or the lows. The lows have essentially been put in. So what do I mean by this? Well, let's do some drawings over here. You'll notice on this first one, a little bit too early to really judge the whole thing, but you will notice that on the first tick that we get, extremely expanded on the Bollinger Bands, and then they start to collapse right here, right? At that point, the reaccumulation phase has already been well underway, and Bitcoin had already put in the lows months prior, and well, it was onwards and upwards to majorly new all-time highs over the course of the next couple of years. Same thing in 2014, 2015. We see volatility expand, which is what you do expect, obviously, during your parabolic blow-off tops and then your catastrophic, soul-crushing downside moves. volatility naturally does expand during those times. And well, when do we see the Bollinger Bands start to collapse in on each other yet again? Well, that was right around here. Lows were obviously in. Reaccumulation phase was actually already completed by that point. And the next couple of years were just straight upwards and onwards to the upside. And then 2018, same thing over here, right? Bollinger Bands expand to all hell. And what happens after that? Once they start to come into each other right here and start to collapse on each other, the lows were already in. The lows were already in at that point. And over the next couple of years, the reaccumulation phase gets underway there. And then, well, that's, our current all-time highs at the upper $60,000 territory. Anyways, the reason why this is relevant right now is simply because we've seen the expansion. Obviously, that was, in this region right here, and it's already collapsing into itself right here. So what does that essentially imply? Well, it does imply that we're probably from a timing perspective closer to, or perhaps already have put in the major macro lows. Again, whether that coincides with another move down to $25,000-ish or not, I don't have a strong opinion on just yet because I want to see this curl around a little bit more like this perhaps. But ultimately, you will notice that once it starts to really rapidly come back up, I'm talking about the bottom side Bollinger Band right here. So in this case right here, in this case right here, and if we go back to the first one, we already have this one right here. Well, the lows were already in at that point. And we do see that it's come up rapidly right here as well. I do think that it could come up maybe a little bit more, which could coincide with that worst case scenario playing out. But that, again, all hinges upon the fact that, well, we actually get the validation for that criteria to begin with. So that all starts with the daily over here. The daily, of course, closing below about 36,500 or so, I would say, would be the first major green light for that scenario to happen. And then obviously the full-on confirmation, historically speaking, would be with a monthly closure below the white 20 simple, would fully validate the long-term signal to the downside. Until then, I do think that there is, some hopium here, and that would be drastically enhanced in the short-term timeframes if we do see those next pieces of criteria marked off. So again, short-term, I actually do think that Bitcoin gives another try to the upside. Let me go back to this time frame over here. Probably does a little bit of this, maybe one more wick to the downside, whether that happens or not, I don't have a strong opinion, and then plays out that bullish divergence plus momentum oscillators also pointing up from a stochastic perspective. And then the question is, what does Bitcoin do right here? I would imagine next test probably does bust on through and do some bonking action to the upside, but hey, I'd want to see at minimum an hourly closure above 39.9 or a 4-hour closure above about 39. What is this, 39.6 or so. And at that point, I would be looking for a full-on, another $1,000 to $2,000 move somewhere in this blue box territory right here. And then the question is, does Bitcoin reclose any sort of a medium-term time frame above there? If it does, I think that the probabilities of this ending up being massively bearish do get drastically reduced. They are not fully invalidated just yet. Full invalidation is above $45,000. And again, that does have major targets to the upside, as we did look at on this chart right here. So not only would it confirm this as a technical reaccumulation formation in the format of an ascending triangle, which does have a natural implied target, it would also confirm a couple other things as well, which we see right here on the weekly. The weekly would confirm 2 drives of hidden bullish divergence come off the low. Right now, we don't have it, obviously. These are, again, phantoms as of right now. But on top of that, if we did confirm a couple drives of hidden bullish divergence off this low, it would not only just be that, it'd be a higher low in comparison to the last few lows that we see right here on low volatility, with weekly Joule also pointed up as well, and weekly stochastic momentum also pointed up as well right here, as you can see. And well, that would have a technical target basically around the same region that the formation does as well, which is the mid $50,000 territory, maybe even more over time as well. So a lot hinges upon that fact. I don't have any, real calls to be made in between there. Just short term, I'm looking for this one to give another try to the upside. And then, if it starts to clear above those regions, that's when I start to, trade in that direction, or at least think in that direction. I probably shouldn't give out too much of exactly what I'm doing, simply because, well, it's not very wise. It's not very wise to do. But ultimately, you can probably figure it out yourself if you happen to be one of the people who actually, happens to give a fuck. Now, I do want to balance out this statement because, again, while Bitcoin is at these levels, theoretically, there is a humongous risk reward trade to be had on both sides. And it's always about the validations that make those trade ideas, relevant. So if you are trading to one or the other side, what I'd say right now is to have that criteria of what would tell you that whatever trade idea you're looking for is one, likely to happen, and two, unlikely to happen. These are validations and invalidations in the way that I talk about them. And well, you can probably figure out exactly what I'd, be thinking about just based off of what we saw right here. If you want the, the 5-second explanation, daily closure above 44.5 or $45,000, bullish up to mid 50s, daily closure below 36.5, and I am very likely looking for an ultimate move down to $30,000 with probably a stop along the way at about 34.5 or 35. But ultimately, if you're on the short-term time frames, obviously there's a lot more interesting things to be looking at right there. At least in my opinion, right now, short-term, I do think another try to the upside. And just from an underlying market dynamic standpoint, the market is generally bearish right now, right? Fear and green index is at a 23 read, so extreme fear is what we're dealing with. We also see that funding rates are, slightly negative. Now, this is to be expected in a general down market, which you've been experiencing for about 3 months now, 3-4 months. But would be, I guess, a bit of a counterpoint. Really splitting hairs on that one, to be honest with you. So it's perhaps we should leave that one and go over into some of the other more documentable underlying market dynamics, which we can reference here in the indicators tab. Again, here is your fear and green index, but the NUPL is one that I've been focusing on a lot recently, just because we did see a positive, sorry, not a positive, but a bullish divergence on the January lows. Now, you could very easily argue that that's already played out, to be fair, but would kind of help out with the with judging biases. And then there was one last thing that I wanted to get to. Was it over here? Hash rate's also up, which typically, a better thing than not better thing, obviously. No, maybe it wasn't here. Maybe it was. Yeah, okay. All right, so there is one thing that I forgot to mention on the bearish side here. A big one on the bearish side, I should say, nonetheless. But here's the thing. Right now, while it is certainly more on the bearish side, you'll notice that the 5-day stochastic momentum, which did officially cross the downside on our last closure, which was Sunday at 5 p.m. Eastern time, is pivoted to turn back onto the upside above 39,600. So imagine this: if Bitcoin does play out the short-term time frame move and not just test around 39.5, let's say, but actually close above there, not only will we see, all of the other medium and semi higher term time frame stochastic momentum turn to the upside, and also a range resolution with targets higher as well, but we'll see the 5-day turn up as well, which is gonna validate a exit out of the bearish control zone, obviously, and well, upside from there. So a lot's at stake right now. I suspect that this is all going to be run off of, a lot of the political and geopolitical situations going on right now. So you have America with Biden, who is set to sign some sort of a crypto regulation thing, decree, whatever. I don't fucking know. This week, I think maybe even today or tomorrow is rather likely. And you can notice from a news event like that, or just an event like that in general, which will matter, to be fair. I mean, that probably does change around the fundamental picture, I would think. Right now the market's pricing in something very, very bad, obviously. And when the market prices in something very, very bad, and then something, less than very, very bad happens, so it could still be bad, but just a little bit less than that, than the expectation, well, things, very likely do move in the opposite direction. Same thing for, what was the other one? The geopolitical situation, which, hey, I have high hopes, although I'm certainly not an expert, nor am I qualified to speak on it, but hopefully cleaner heads prevail and, some peace talks start to evolve, which it sounds like maybe things are moving in that direction. That'd be amazing. That'd be great for everyone, obviously, like fucking obviously. And if something like that happens, well, yeah, I would imagine that that also does help out the upside. But again, if you just want to kind of nail down the statement into, 2 sentences: above 44.5, good; below 36.5, bad; above 44.5, I'm looking for mid 50s; below 36.5, I'm looking ultimately for 30,000 and probably more over time as well. But for right now, the hopium still does remain alive, and short term, it does look like Bitcoin Bullahs do give another try to the upside, and then we get to play the game of, or the same game as yesterday: does Bitcoin clear back above 39.5 or not? So with all of that said, I think I'll be shutting off the stream now. I want to wish you well. I want to wish you a safe Tuesday. And with that said, I'm going to be signing off. Take care and see you hopefully soon.